Health authorities and international monitoring agencies are currently focusing on a developing biological crisis originating from the southern tip of South America. Specifically, the Patagonia region encompassing parts of Argentina and Chile. The situation gained global attention following reports of a severe hantavirus cluster that has now moved beyond terrestrial borders and into international waters. This report examines the data surrounding the Andes virus, a specific and particularly lethal strain of hantavirus, and the subsequent impact on public health surveillance as of May 2026. The gravity of the current situation is underscored by a case fatality ratio that officials currently place near 38% among identified clusters. While hantavirus is a known entity in the Americas, the 2026 developments have prompted a reassessment of how the virus interacts with human populations in high-traffic or confined environments. The primary driver of concern remains the Andes virus's unique status among hantaviruses, as the only variant with documented, albeit rare, potential for person-to-person transmission. For viewers following these developments, the central question revolves around the source of exposure and the efficacy of current containment protocols. In Patagonia, the virus is endemic, traditionally circulating within specific rodent reservoirs, notably the long-tailed pygmy rice rat. However, the current reporting focuses on a significant shift from sporadic rural cases to a clustered outbreak involving international travelers. This has led to increased scrutiny of travel hubs in the region, particularly Ushuaia, Argentina, which serves as a major embarkation point for South Atlantic and Antarctic transit. Public health officials are currently investigating the environmental conditions that led to the initial exposure of the index case, an adult passenger who had recently traveled through Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay before boarding a vessel in early April. The clinical progression of the disease is rapid and unforgiving. It begins with nonspecific symptoms such as high fever and gastrointestinal distress, but can quickly deteriorate into hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, characterized by acute respiratory distress and cardiovascular shock. As of the first week of May, the World Health Organization and the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control have logged multiple fatalities linked to this single chain of transmission. The broader context of 2025 shows that across the Americas, hantavirus remains a persistent threat, with over 200 confirmed cases and a significant death toll. However, the 2026 Patagonia-linked cluster is being treated with heightened urgency due to its presence in a confined maritime setting, which provides a unique laboratory for observing the virus's transmission dynamics. While some sensationalist reports have suggested the creation of human exclusion zones in Patagonia, official statements emphasize that the risk is primarily associated with specific environmental exposures, such as cleaning rodent-infested structures or direct contact with aerosolized secretions in rural settings, rather than a blanket threat to all human life in the region. Nonetheless, the stringent monitoring and isolation orders currently in place for hundreds of individuals reflect the high stakes involved in managing a pathogen with such a high mortality rate and limited treatment options. The core of the current investigation centers on the Dutch-flagged vessel MV Hondius and its trajectory after departing Ushuaia on April 1, 2026. According to documentation provided by the World Health Organization and the Africa Centers for Disease Control, the outbreak's timeline began when the index case presented with symptoms just 5 days after departure. By April 11, the first fatality occurred while the ship was in transit. This set off a complex international coordination effort involving the United Kingdom's National International Health Regulations focal point, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and health authorities in South Africa and Cabo Verde. Laboratory confirmation has been a critical component of the response. Initial testing conducted in South Africa and later confirmed by the RIVM in the Netherlands used polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, and genomic sequencing to identify the pathogen as the Andes virus strain. The data confirmed that this was not a standard respiratory virus but a high-consequence zoonotic pathogen. As the ship moved across the South Atlantic, stopping at remote locations including South Georgia, Tristan da Cunha, and St. Helena, the medical teams on board had to manage a growing number of suspected cases. One adult female, identified as a close contact of the index case, died shortly after disembarking for flight to Johannesburg, while another male passenger required emergency medical evacuation from Ascension Island to a specialized intensive care unit in South Africa. This sequence of events has highlighted the extreme logistical challenges of managing hantavirus in remote or maritime environments. Epidemiologists are currently analyzing the close contact hypothesis. While the majority of hantavirus infections occur via the inhalation of aerosolized rodent excreta, the clustering on the MV Hondius suggests that secondary transmission among passengers may have occurred during the ship's month-long voyage. This remains a point of intense scientific scrutiny, as verified person-to-person spread of Andes virus typically requires prolonged, intimate contact. The Global Virus Network and the ECDC are currently cross-referencing these cases against the known incubation period, which can range from 7 days to 6 weeks. This long window of uncertainty means that surveillance must remain active for all 147 passengers and crew members long after they have reached their destinations. Surveillance teams in the Netherlands are currently monitoring individuals who shared cabin space or flights with confirmed cases, with at least 3 individuals undergoing rigorous diagnostic testing after showing early symptoms. Meanwhile, the vessel itself has been subject to strict environmental cleaning protocols, specifically avoiding dry sweeping, which could further aerosolize any latent viral particles. The international response has also involved the repatriation of remains under high containment conditions and the implementation of physical distancing and isolation for those remaining on board. Authorities in Cabo Verde and the Netherlands are coordinating the final stages of this maritime quarantine, ensuring that no symptomatic individuals enter the general population without cleared laboratory results. Moving forward, the public health strategy regarding hantavirus focuses on 3 main pillars: environmental management, rigorous surveillance, and public education. The primary prevention remains the avoidance of contact with rodent reservoirs, particularly in rural or semi-rural areas of South America. Guidance issued by the CDC and the WHO emphasizes that while the Andes virus is a severe threat, it is not a general-purpose pandemic candidate in the way that respiratory viruses like influenza are. It remains a zoonotic disease that requires specific, often neglected, environmental conditions to bridge into human populations. For travelers and residents in Patagonia, the advice is clinical and clear. Ensure that living and storage areas are rodent-proof. Use wet mopping techniques with disinfectants like bleach rather than dry sweeping. And remain vigilant for symptoms such as muscle aches and shortness of breath for up to 45 days after potential exposure. The current 2026 cluster has not led to a widespread public health emergency for the general population, as the risk is assessed as low outside of the immediate chain of transmission. However, the limits of current medical science are an honest factor in this reporting. There is currently no licensed vaccine and no specific antiviral treatment for hantavirus. Management is strictly supportive, relying on early intervention and the availability of high-level intensive care and mechanical ventilation. This lack of a silver bullet makes early detection and rapid isolation the only effective tools for preventing secondary clusters. Surveillance programs in South America are being bolstered to monitor rodent populations and viral load in the environment, particularly in areas where human-rodent overlap is increasing due to land use changes. In the context of the Patagonia exclusion zone terminology, it is more accurate to view these as high surveillance regions where public activity is guided by seasonal risk assessments rather than a permanent ban on human habitation. The situation on the MV Hondius is expected to stabilize as the 45-day monitoring period concludes for the final groups of exposed individuals. Until then, international focal points will continue to share genomic data to see if any mutations in this specific 2026 strain account for the cluster's size or if it was simply a result of the ship's unique confined environment. We will continue to track official reports from the WHO and regional health ministries as more data becomes available from the remaining diagnostic tests. For ongoing updates on global health reporting and infectious disease surveillance, consider subscribing to this channel. The operational core of the current public health response is centered on the maritime and laboratory logistics following the departure of the MV Hondius from Ushuaia on April 1, 2026. According to the formal dossiers compiled by the World Health Organization and the Dutch National Institute for Public Health and the Environment, the virus began circulating among a cohort of 147 passengers and crew shortly after the vessel entered international waters. The primary clinical challenge emerged when the index case, who had spent time trekking in the rural hinterlands of Argentine Patagonia, deteriorated rapidly. This individual's progression from mild febrile symptoms to full hantavirus pulmonary syndrome occurred within a span of 72 hours, ultimately leading to a fatality on April 11th while the ship was in transit towards South Georgia. This death served as the catalyst for a massive cross-border epidemiological investigation, as the Andes virus strain, unlike other orthohantaviruses, possesses a documented capacity for person-to-person transmission in confined settings. Medical officers on board were forced to implement a makeshift biocontainment protocol, isolating symptomatic individuals in specific cabins while coordinating with the United Kingdom's national IHR focal point for the British Overseas Territories. The logistical complexity of this event cannot be overstated, as the vessel's planned itinerary included some of the most remote human settlements on Earth, including Tristan da Cunha and St. Helena, where local healthcare infrastructure is insufficient to manage a high-consequence viral outbreak. Central to the laboratory effort was the involvement of the National Institute for Communicable Diseases in South Africa and the RIVM in the Netherlands. When the vessel reached the vicinity of Ascension Island, a high-stakes medical evacuation was executed for a male passenger requiring advanced respiratory support. Samples flown from this site to Level 4 biosafety laboratories confirmed the presence of the Andes virus via reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction and subsequent genomic sequencing. The sequencing data revealed that the viral genome remained consistent with endemic strains found in the long-tailed pygmy rice rat populations of the Magallanes and Tierra del Fuego regions. This finding was critical because it ruled out the emergence of a new, more transmissible variant, suggesting instead that the clustering of cases was a result of the unique environmental conditions of the ship's interior. Despite the scientific data, public anxiety has been fueled by reports of exclusion zones being established across southern South America. Public health officials in Buenos Aires and Santiago have clarified that while certain areas of high rodent activity have been cordoned off, there is no verified blanket ban on human life in Patagonia. Instead, these are targeted surveillance zones where agricultural and tourism activities are strictly regulated. The discrepancy between sensationalist claims and verified epidemiological maps remains a major hurdle for agencies trying to manage the narrative. Further complicating the surveillance effort is the significant overlap between hantavirus symptoms and other common seasonal illnesses. At hospitals in Cape Town and Amsterdam, where passengers eventually disembarked under strict quarantine, physicians have had to distinguish between standard influenza and the early stages of HPS. The data indicates that the viral load in the confirmed 2026 cases was exceptionally high, leading to an aggressive clinical course characterized by severe thrombocytopenia and bilateral pulmonary edema. As of the second week of May, official tallies confirmed that at least 3 deaths are directly linked to the Patagonia cluster, with several other passengers remaining under observation in high isolation units. The economic impact on regional shipping and Antarctic tourism has been immediate, with several cruise lines suspending departures from Ushuaia, pending a full environmental audit of transit hubs. International trade monitors are also assessing the risk to bulk carrier shipping, although the WHO has reiterated that the virus is primarily an aerosolized threat and does not survive for long periods on dry surfaces or cargo. The focus of the investigation now shifts to the final clearance of the 45-day incubation window for all exposed parties, a period during which any new symptomatic case would trigger a restart of the global monitoring clock. The transition from emergency response to long-term mitigations requires a rigorous application of known public health protocols, even as the scientific community grapples with the inherent uncertainties of the Andes virus. Public health guidance issued by the Ministries of Health in Chile and Argentina, in coordination with the Pan American Health Organization, emphasizes that prevention is currently the only effective defense against hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. Because there is no commercially available vaccine and no specific antiviral therapy proven to reliably reverse the course of the disease, the focus remains on interrupting the zoonotic link between the long-tailed pygmy rice, rat, and human populations. The practical takeaways for those living in or traveling to the affected regions are clinical and precise. Residents are advised to maintain a perimeter of at least 30 meters around dwellings that is free of high grass, brush, and wood piles, which serve as primary habitats for the Oligorismes longicaudatus reservoir. Furthermore, the entry of the virus into the human respiratory system typically occurs through the inhalation of aerosolized droppings, urine, or saliva. Consequently, the most critical safety directive is the total prohibition of dry sweeping or vacuuming in potentially infested areas such as sheds, cabins, or storage units. Instead, officials mandate the use of a 10% bleach solution to thoroughly wet all surfaces before cleaning, allowing at least 30 minutes of contact time to ensure viral deactivation. For those required to enter high-risk environments, the use of N95 or higher-rated respirators is not merely a suggestion but a vital safeguard against the microscopic droplets that carry the viral load. The surveillance apparatus in Patagonia is currently operating at an unprecedented scale, utilizing environmental sampling and rodent density monitoring to predict potential masting events. Periods where a surge in seed production, particularly from the Colehu bamboo, leads to an explosion in the rodent population. While the term exclusion zone has been used in media reports to describe the resulting movement restrictions, health officials view these as dynamic risk management sectors. The ethical challenge facing policymakers involves balancing the economic survival of the Patagonian tourism and agricultural sectors against the catastrophic 38% mortality rate of the virus. Declaring large swathes of land unsafe for human life carries profound implications for local communities, yet the precedent set by the April 2026 Maritime Cluster demonstrates that the cost of a single containment failure is measured in lives. Scientists at the Global Virus Network have noted that while the Andes virus remains the only hantavirus with verified human-to-human potential, this mode of transmission remains inefficient and usually requires the close, prolonged contact found in households or confined ship cabins. This nuance is vital for preventing global panic while maintaining localized vigilance. As we look toward the remainder of 2026, the honest limits of our knowledge must be acknowledged. We do not yet fully understand why certain individuals develop the cytokine storm that leads to fatal pulmonary edema while others may experience a less severe clinical course. Until clinical trials for monoclonal antibodies or new antiviral candidates yield results, the burden of safety rests on surveillance and early diagnostic intervention. Hospitals in the region have been placed on high alert to treat any unexplainable illness as a potential hantavirus case, prioritizing rapid transfer to facilities equipped with extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, or ECMO, which currently represents the highest level of supportive care available. The situation in South America serves as a stark reminder of the persistent threat posed by zoonotic spillover events and the necessity of a coordinated, transparent international response. Public health is a collective responsibility that relies on the accurate dissemination of data and the adherence of the public to established safety norms. As the 45-day monitoring window for the MV Hondius passengers closes, the global health community remains vigilant, watching for any further signs that this endemic threat could